Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, the Speaker of the House, not the presiding officer at the moment, but the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, made some irresponsible remarks about climate change. He was asked about the reports that the President is prepared to act to protect the planet and future generations from climate change impacts. And here's what the Speaker had to say, quote, "I think this is absolutely crazy. Why would you want to increase the cost of energy and kill more American jobs at a time when the American people are still asking, where are the jobs? Clear enough?" End quote. Well, I could not disagree more strongly with Speaker Boehner. Presidential action to protect the climate and future generations is absolutely essential. The House is controlled by leaders who deny the science and are recklessly ignoring the risks of a rapidly changing climate. The House has become the last refuge of the Flat Earth Society. That is why the President must act, using his existing authorities under the law. The Speaker's assertion that acting to reduce emissions will hurt the economy is absolutely wrong. We need to act to lead the world in the clean energy economy of the future. If we don't act, initiative, leadership, and economic growth will go to countries that do. Now, I've been in Congress for over 3 decades. I worked on the Clean Air Act, reauthorization of 1990. I remember the testimony we received in the 1980s about how if we tried to do more in the environmental area, we would lose our jobs and our economy would be set back. We would face another depression. Well, on a bipartisan basis, we adopted the Clean Air Act. We had the bill sponsored and signed by President George H.W. Bush. And that legislation led to accomplishments of reducing air pollution in some of our heavily polluted urban areas, including my own home of Los Angeles. We were able to stop the ravages of acid rain, which were causing destruction of our forests and rivers and ponds in the Northeast and in Canada. We were able to do something about toxic pollution, which were causing birth defects and cancer in large numbers of people who live near industrial facilities. And we were able to get legislation passed and move forward to stop the destruction of the upper ozone of our planet. We accomplished these goals because we didn't pay attention to the naysayers who told us our economy would be ruined, we would lose jobs, we should forget about a healthy environment. We should forget about pristine air in our national parks. Luckily, we had leadership from Republicans and Democrats to do something, and we can now talk about the great accomplishments that we achieved. And at the same time, we created more jobs. We created more industries. We created new technological developments. But let me talk about why the President needs to act on this question of climate change. On Monday, the International Energy Agency, IEA, released a report concluding that the world is not on track to meet the goal of limiting global average temperatures to below 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 2 degrees Celsius. Now, that is a tremendous concern because the scientists are telling us that if we don't achieve the goal of reducing the temperature rise, we are going to see some very severe impacts. Flooding of our coastal cities, increased risk to our food supply, unprecedented heat waves, exacerbated water scarcity in many regions, increased frequency of high-intensity tropic tropical cyclones, irreversible loss of biodiversity, including coral reefs. Recognizing this danger, our country and other countries around the world joined together in 2010 and said, we've got to do what we can to keep the temperature rise below 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. The IEA concluded that the world is failing to meet this goal. Greenhouse gas emissions are driving climate change, and it's happening in an increasing rapidly. So can we just deny this is happening? Can we say, oh, we'll cost jobs and we shouldn't pay any attention to it? On our committee, the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over this whole question, the Democratic leaders on the committee have asked that we have hearings to bring in the scientists, because some of our Republican members have said they don't believe in the science. We sent over 36 letters asking that the scientists be brought before the committee to tell us why they think these terrible things may happen. And we have never gotten a response from a single letter of request for hearings. Can you imagine the people running the Congress denying the scientists and then refusing to hear from the scientists, or claiming the science is uncertain and not resolved, and then refusing to hear from scientists who could come in and talk about what they've learned? Now, if we're facing a world where all the accumulated greenhouse gases stay in that atmosphere, and to the point where our planet is heating up, and we're facing terrible consequences, you don't have to buy everything they say, but what are the chances that they're right? 10%? Would we take the risk that we're going to face a 10% chance of all these catastrophic consequences and do nothing about it? Well, that seems to be what the Republican leaders are saying, including the primary leader of the House, the Speaker. Now, let's look at some other more recent examples. When the President announced historic fuel economy standards, critics said cars would get smaller, more expensive, and it would hurt the sales of our automobiles. Well, they were completely wrong. Vehicle sales are booming. They are at high levels now. Consumers are saving money because cars are more fuel efficient. This is an accomplishment, despite all the naysayers. When the Obama administration issued mercury standards for power plants and other sources, House Republicans said it would cost jobs and raise electricity prices. Well, that hasn't happened. Implementation has gone smoothly. Electricity prices have not gone up. In fact, wholesale prices actually went down, and there have been no rolling blackouts as predicted by the doomsday scenarios. In 2011, the EPA issued a report on the benefits of the Clean Air Act over the period from 1990 to 2020. According to the study, the direct benefits of the Clean Air Act in the form of cleaner air and a healthier population, more productive Americans, are estimated to reach nearly $2 trillion in the year 2020. We're talking about saving money by protecting our environment. So when the Speaker says that we shouldn't pay attention, it's crazy to pay attention to the concerns about climate change, he's absolutely wrong. When he says action to reduce carbon emissions will harm the economy, just the opposite will happen. We will create new clean energy businesses and more economic growth. The President has said if Congress won't act, he must act, and he's absolutely right. The President must act, and he has the authority to act under existing laws. Congress will not act because the leadership of the House of Representatives denies reality. They want to politicize science. They want to politicize science by ignoring it. Well, science is not another political opinion. Science is looking at the evidence. Tune on the television news any day of the week, and you will hear stories about droughts and superstorms and new hurricanes and new climate events and new record levels of temperatures. Don't we think that something might be happening and that we have some responsibility in government to try to do something about this issue? Addressing climate change will require actions over the long term, but the IEA report highlights 4 policies that could be implemented now and through 2020 at no economic cost. Policies that will help reduce local air pollution and increase energy security. First, that report recommended that countries adopt specific energy efficiency measures. We don't have to build new power plants if we use our energy resources more efficiently. We could have more efficient heating and cooling systems in residential and commercial buildings, more efficient appliances and lighting in residential and commercial buildings. Energy efficiency measures can account for half of the emissions reductions that the report proposes through the year 2020. Secondly, the report said that if countries limit the construction and use of inefficient subcritical coal-fired power plants and switch instead to cleaner and more efficient plants, we will see the air get cleaner and the threat from climate change be dramatically reduced. Thirdly, the report recommended that countries reduce emissions of methane, a potent greenhouse gas from upstream oil and gas production, by installing readily available technologies in the short term and pursuing additional long-term reduction strategies. And fourth, the report proposed that countries accelerate the phase-out of fossil fuel subsidies, which exacerbate climate change by encouraging consumption of carbon pollution-emitting energy. Why are we subsidizing the oil companies with special tax breaks? Is a tax break for the oil company any different than an appropriation of dollars for the oil companies? They're doing very well on their own. What we need to do is to provide a level playing field for competition for renewable fuels and alternatives and efficiency. These are the things that we ought to be focusing on rather than keeping oil and coal the predominant sources of our energy for electricity and fueling our motor vehicles. Things are changing. They're changing because investors don't want to buy into stranded investments because they know climate change is happening. The American people are getting a clear sense that something is happening in the climate, but they don't hear Congress even talking about it. And around the world, others are moving forward. Why should we allow others, whether it's the Chinese, the Europeans, to develop the technologies? We have always been the leader in the developing technologies for the future. We developed the catalytic converter to control pollution from automobiles. We invented the scrubbers that could be used to on power plants to reduce the emissions that come from these power plants. We have made all these advances over the years because we've given a clear incentive for anti-pollution control devices because we wanted to reduce pollution. And now we have a Congress where they want to deny at the highest levels of leadership in this Congress that climate change exists and the President shouldn't take any action. Imagine the top leader of the House of Representatives saying, I think it's absolutely crazy. Why would you want to increase the cost of energy and kill more American jobs at a time when the American people are still asking, where are their jobs? Well, the jobs can come along with efforts to reduce pollution. We have always seen the economy and our protection of the environment go hand in hand. We shouldn't say that we have to choose. We can have both. We have a long history of this country of bipartisan support for the proposition and the reality that we can preserve the environment and protect our economy and prosper if we are willing to adopt policies and show some leadership. Mr. Speaker, I remember when the compliance costs were being thought of when we were trying to deal with the acid rain problem. And industry after industry on the record, and it's all available to review, claimed the costs would be enormous. And then when we passed the law, the actual costs were a small fraction of what was being predicted. When they were told that they had to accomplish the goal under a cap-and-trade program to reduce sulfur emissions that were causing acid rain, we accomplished the goal at a fraction of the original estimates, which I think were highly inflated for scare purposes. But we accomplished the goal because we said, this is the goal. Accomplish that goal. You can benefit from new technologies and new ways to accomplish our environmental objectives. And that's exactly what we did when we dealt with the acid rain pollution problem. So my colleagues and Mr. Speaker, let's not have leaders who say we have to say that we're going to ignore the threat from climate change in order to protect jobs. We can protect and promote jobs and the protection of our environment at the same time. And Mr. President, you were so right when you said, if the Congress will not act, you must lead. And we are looking to the President to show that leadership, because we're not going to get it from this House of Representatives. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back.